Hi everyone! Strawberry Fields Forever, finally. This should have been published on November 24 because we wanted to celebrate 56 years since the Beatles recorded it. But UMG, who owns the copyright, not only blocked my first listen of this song, but didn't even bother to answer back my dispute, which I filed a month ago. But I guess we can still celebrate the Beatles and Strawberry Fields forever, even if we're 1 month late. This was a fascinating piece of music to explore and learn about for me. It's a song that is so dependent on the steps it went through in the production process that there's absolutely no way to give a live performance of it that preserves the original effect. I think these techniques were employed here kind of as a next step along the way after what Impressionist composers achieved with their compositions and stylistic innovations. In fact, a lot of the same features can be found in this song as we find in Impressionist music. So I'm going to talk about those a bit. First of all, if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll probably remember that some of them I talk about the directive function of moving from one chord to the next. For example, the centering comfortable home identity of the tonic chord, or the power and pull of the dominant 5 chord, or even melodically the way in which, as we climb the do-re-mi scale, we reach a point at the 7th note where we can hardly bear to stop, because the sequence simply cries out for us to ascend one more note. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Please, please, please give me that last note. There's an old legend about young Mozart, which says that his father used to get him out of bed in the morning by playing these first 7 notes, and the little boy couldn't bear to hear it stop there, so he'd hop out of bed and go play the final top note on the keyboard. You'll understand when I say that the common use of these musical elements acts as a compass, providing a sense of orientation, and as a rudder, sending us in a specific direction, and as a propeller moving us forward in that chosen certain direction. Sometimes these musical effects simply happen by default. What I mean is, a lot of music, especially simple song-style music, as we often find in folk or popular or even rock styles, they use these features to create a basic framework on which to essentially set a tune or some lyrics or something. Kind of like we use sentence structure and punctuation in even the most basic communication without a lot of thought put into how and whether it is serving our purpose. Because we don't always need to be artistic or profound in everything. It's perfectly okay to write a message to your teenager saying, pick up some bread at the store on your way home. Or to tell your spouse some humorous but entirely unimportant event that maybe took place at work today. But other times, used more consciously, the power of these musical, orientational, and directional effects are consciously employed with the intent of providing us with a highly impactful experience. Something to compellingly communicate a message or idea, just like a writer carefully chooses their words and crafts their sentences with attention to choice of vocabulary and exactly how and where and what the punctuation will be in order to create the most compelling literary work that they would like to produce. And this brings us to the flip side, that of conscientiously avoiding and preventing these directive musical elements in order to evoke a specific atmosphere, which is actually a lot harder than it sounds. To use the writing example, it's the difference between sending a text message without bothering about adding capitals, commas, periods, and a poet consciously choosing to write a poem without the standard application of these basic literary elements for the purpose of a particular desired outcome. And that is what the Impressionist composers did. They found new ways of using harmonies so that rather than channel us through a chord progression or scale that makes us feel as if we're being directed through the music on a focused journey, we experience the harmonic world entirely differently. More as a palette of colors with subtle differences in shade and saturation. We no longer experience dissonance as something that pushes us towards a resolution, but more as a natural color or mood or even temperature, which we enjoy for its own sake, without needing to pull away from it or find a remedy or resolution for it. Of course, these composers were still working with physical instruments, which means all these evocative colors and impressions and mirages in the world of sound had to be created using purely harmonic and melodic and rhythmic means, which have their full effect in the moment of performance. Not, for example, by manipulating the sound after it was performed, as we find commonly happens today. Now, Strawberry Fields Forever is a highly evocative piece of music. If you remember from my first listen, I really had no clue what it was about. And you couldn't see the whole story because the camera was on me, but Vlad was thoroughly enjoying my bewilderment as he managed the camera. And by the end of the song, I simply had to find out what it was that was so funny to him. So I did a quick search online and found the Wikipedia article which explained what this Strawberry Fields Forever actually was. And whew, mystery solved. Turns out it was a Salvation Army orphanage near Lennon's childhood home, and this song includes a nostalgic look back at his feelings towards the place. From what I've read, it seems that his Aunt Mimi was rather too rigid and harsh for a child of his temperament. She didn't exactly approve of his spending a lot of time over at the Strawberry Field home, but he loved to go there, and sometimes he'd have her permission, while other times he'd sneak over without her knowing. And his memories of the place, I read, include playing with friends, selling lemonade, hearing a Salvation Army brass band at garden parties held on the grounds, playing in the garden, even climbing a tree and sitting in the branches. It was his little private escape from the rigidity of home life. This garden was where he could be free to think, to dream, to imagine, to feel. But there's more than just nostalgia here. it's not merely looking back to a time long gone, reliving the past. This music is creating its own experience, and it truly pulls the listener in, immersing us in a mystical, dreamy world of mirage and impression. We feel that we can't tell where the smoke ends and the mist begins, or whether we're looking in a mirror, or at a reflection in a pool, or at an actual physical object, or are we the reflection itself? It's quite masterfully done, and there are two primary means by which this was achieved musically. The first is compositional. The second has to do with the handling of the recording material. So let's look at the compositional elements first, which are very much like what the Impressionist composers did. The closest we can get to identifying a key for this song is B flat. And I'll explain what I mean by the closest we can get a little bit later. But for now, let's just call it B flat because it will help us work our way through this. Which means this is our home chord. And the first time we hear it in the music, it sounds like this. But we don't start there in the song. In fact, the whole introduction avoids making us feel like there's any particular home chord to go to, and it takes us to that B flat in such a roundabout way that we don't really know what we've arrived at when we finally get there. Let's see how it sounds. The first thing we have, let me play the B flat chord again. You'll probably have a hard time keeping that in your inner ear memory, but that's the home chord of the song. But the first sound we get is an F chord. All of that, we don't feel like we've really arrived anywhere. But believe it or not, this last chord that I played is our home chord, and yet it doesn't feel anything like home to our ears at all. Now, before I go further into this whole harmonic, wonderful world, let me just say that there are certain elements in this song which are very classic, very basic, very standard. And that has to do with the architectural form. We have a standard format of intro, chorus, verse, chorus, so on, eventually coming to a final refrain and outro. So there's absolutely nothing fancy here. And that allows the song to have a relatable form in spite of the abundant ambiguity that the harmonic scheme creates. Talking about harmonies, chords, and music and all of that, let me remind you that if you want to support my rock journey here on Virgin Rock and at the same time learn more about music theory and composition techniques, even if you're a total beginner, check out my membership community on Patreon or Ko-fi, where I am presenting a music theory course designed to take absolute beginners, you don't have to know a thing, all the way to the point where you can write and arrange your own music, understand all music better, and even unlock some of the classical music world. So back to the harmonies. Here comes the chorus. We do get to enjoy our B-flat home chord for 2 full bars, and it's followed by the standard dominant 5. But this dominance of the 5, its directive power, is eliminated or at least drastically diminished, because it is presented as a minor chord, which means it no longer pulls us back towards home. So instead, we drift and float through various harmonies at a leisurely pace, eventually softly landing on B flat. We do get to enjoy our B flat home chord for 2 full bars, and it's followed by the standard dominant 5. So again, here is our B flat chord, that is home. And the chorus starts out with that home for a while. And this note here is where we end up on the dominant 5, but listen to the minor tonality. It would sound so different if it went like this. That we feel a sort of pull that would take us back to a 1 there, but it doesn't happen that way. Instead, and we stay on that minor 5 until the next bar. And this directive power, this dominance, because it's eliminated, it drastically diminishes the pull, the force of that dominant quality because of its presentation as a minor chord, which means it no longer takes us towards home, as I just showed you. So instead we drift and float through various harmonies at a leisurely pace, eventually softly landing on B flat, the home. But not by coming at it from the standard dominant location. Rather, we settle gently to it by way of the 4 chord. So, again, here is our B flat. And the melody, when it arrives, that is how we get to that home pitch. But before it, rather than having this dominant, instead we have the 4 chord, which is less compelling. It's softer, it's more gentle in taking us home. And it goes like this. And you can hear how it just gently flows through without any sort of solid arrival point. The verse also uses this style of avoiding the directive pull of 5 to 1, but then there's even more than just the chords contributing to this dreamy sound world. On top of all this careful avoidance of harmonic drive and direction in the chords, we also have the melody, which glides along above the harmonic support, seemingly unconcerned about whether or not it's harmonizing with the chords. What I mean is, a lot of the points emphasized in the melody, either by being on a strong beat or by rising higher to point it out, are non-harmony notes, which keeps the music from settling. It's as if it stays drifting somewhere up above the atmosphere. In fact, the first time we hear this happen is on only the 3rd syllable, the word take. Let me take. Here again is the B flat chord, and our first note, which belongs to that chord. And so here is our chord. This comes in on an unstressed beat, and that is the strongest pitch so far. We lean into it a bit extra, but it does not harmonize with the chord underneath it. You can hear that this chord does not belong to this note. And that happens many, many times throughout the melody in the entire piece of music. One more thing I want to point out. In some of my other videos, I've talked about how the pulse patterns, the rhythmic elements, can either lock us into a groove or throw us off by breaking the pattern. Now, imagine if this song were giving us all this harmonic and melodic haze and drifting world, but we were still toe-tapping along as if we knew exactly where each foot should land. We'd never quite be completely removed from our concrete, cerebral world. But there are small modifications to the pulse pattern at strategic points in this song. Not enough to make us feel like we're dealing with a tangled mess, and also not the type of rhythmic modification that makes the music feel more energized and lively, but instead a few beats added or removed just often enough to keep us floating, gliding, drifting without knowing for sure where the next step is going to land. And here's an example from the refrain, which happens just after it says, "Strawberry fields, nothing is real." And then it says, "Nothing to get." Nothing to get hung about, but nothing to get. That is a single bar, which is only half the length of the others. So we lose our location in the pattern of strong and weak beats a little bit. Here we have strawberry fields, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. We think that's a 3, right? But you heard how it was actually another 1. So we went 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it threw us off just a little bit. It changed the emphasis just enough that we don't have our perfectly oriented pulse pattern in this moment. And then, before we manage to fully reorient ourselves in that one bar that follows with the full 4 beats, we're hit with another one that is 3/4 of the normal length. Plus, the pulse pattern is organized differently. We musicians call it 6/8 time, but basically it's completely different from everything around it. And that's the whole intent. So here it is, Strawberry Fields Forever. And you'll hear if I count 1, 2, 3, 1, because it's only 3 beats there. 1, 2, 3, 1. It doesn't sound quite right, because it's not meant to be pulsed that way. Instead it goes 1, pulse, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a completely different pattern. And we lose our bearings. It doesn't fit the rhythmic groove. But by now, we don't really have a groove or predictable pattern left to us at all. Its tracks, its footsteps, have completely vanished. So, in this song, we have all 3 of the primary music elements working to create this hazy dream world. Harmony, with all the avoidance of any strong harmonic pull. Melody, which floats above the harmonies, not particularly concerned with agreeing with them or not. and rhythm, which has just enough points in the music where the groove, the pattern is interrupted, that we kind of lose our location. We're not sure where the next foot is supposed to land. I'm going to include a couple links to some French Impressionist music in the description, and I think you'll be amazed at the dreamy sound world similarities you'll find between these music scapes when you listen to them. But all of this that I've gone over so far is only the compositional element. We haven't yet talked about what else goes into creating what we hear in this song. And that has to do with what was done after the recording. And this is where we go beyond the Impressionist composers into the more modern world of sound manipulation, recorded sound manipulation. It turns out that the Beatles spent 45 hours over the course of 5 weeks working on recording this song, trying different keys, different tempi, different instrumentations, and after all that investment of time and effort, John Lennon decided he wanted parts of one and parts of another of their several versions, and he wanted it to be joined together. Well, when he told Martin what he wanted, Martin told him, that's not really feasible because both those versions that you want are not only different speeds, but in different keys. Now, you can't exactly just paste 2 tapes together with such major differences and expect anything to sound okay about it. It doesn't work. But Lennon, he must have been either incredibly demanding to work with, or else he had an incredible amount of confidence in Martin's ability to work magic. And in this case, Martin came through with magic. You know how it is when you slow a tape down and the pitch drops, essentially changing the key of the piece. And of course, vice versa if you speed it up. It's the same effect that we get if we're standing by a train track and we hear a train approaching with its horn blasting, and it comes past us, and then as it passes us, we hear the pitch lower more and more. It's the same thing that's happening. So that's what Martin did. He slowed one version down, and he sped the other one up a little bit. And he managed to get both of them to match closely enough that they could be joined and sound like they belonged together. When I found that out, I thought it was a really creative solution. But more than that, this unplanned element of the creation of the song, this manipulation of the recordings, had a huge impact on the end result. Because they had to be made to meet at some happy middle point, the tonal location of both halves is changed in such a way that neither one is in a specific identifiable key. Instead, it's some ambiguous tonal place that isn't found on an absolutely pitched instrument like piano or harp, or mellotron for that matter. And that is why this song exists only in its fullest glory as a recording. It's literally impossible to achieve this unique tonal palette and soundscape with only physical instruments. We can get close. We can work with the compositional elements to create that otherworldly haze, but nothing will ever fully meet what the recording achieved. Now, with all this discussion, I haven't delved into the lyrics at all, but I think you can see how the musical elements of this song are so perfectly suited to the vagueness and non-committal style of the lyrical content. And it all works together so well to create a fascinating, evocative, immersive, and incredibly unique musical experience. Anyway, I'm looking forward to your comments, especially in regard to what this musical exploration might mean to you as you begin to link in your own mind the ideas between music and lyrics, as well as how you relate to this song in your own personal experience. I'll see you soon.